Welcome. I am your host, Cindy Watson, and it is my pleasure to introduce you today to Alexa Larkin, or Lexi as she likes to be known as. So, Lexi Larkin is the owner and the managing attorney of Larkin Law. She specializes in family law and estate planning. And for the past 5 years running, she's received accolades for her work from both Super Lawyers and Martindale Hubble. So, obviously, she's doing something right. And Lexi's been elected and stepped up to serve in many leadership roles in her community, including in the legal community with executive council of the family law section of her county bar association and as vice president of the Association for Women's Lawyers, which I personally love. So, and prior to practicing law, Ms. Larkin was a Division I varsity track and field athlete. So welcome, Lexi. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Can't wait to dig in. But I've got to start, got to ask, what was your track event? Tell us a little bit about that.
I was mostly a discus thrower. So you think about the Greek guys on like the vases on, that's kind of modern day with clothes on, thankfully.
Yeah.
That's what I did in college. I also threw the shot put a little bit and the hammer, but the discus was my main event.
That's pretty interesting. You don't hear that as often for women. That's not your everyday go-to.
No,
So
no, it's
that's
it's
awesome.
not, it's not. It's a very kind of niche sport. My dad was a thrower in college, and so he kind of got me started on it, and it was awesome.
That's
It's great.
fantastic. Well, tell us, you've mentioned already about your father. Now we know a little bit about your discus throwing background, which is
Mhm.
interesting. But tell us a little bit about yourself, and in particular, what made you want to pursue a career as an attorney?
I taught between undergrad and law school. I was a teaching assistant for fourth graders,
Oh, cool.
and I during the course of that year, I had two students that were in my class, in the classroom that I was assisting in, that suffered some kind of abuse, physical or sexual, by an immediate family member. Unfortunately, it was horrible.
Wow.
And, apart from reporting that abuse up the chain of command at the school, there really wasn't a lot that I could do, as an assistant, a teaching assistant in the school system. And it made me feel, very kind of hopeless. And so it really got my interest going in child advocacy and how to give these kiddos a voice in these types of situations. And then in law school, I kind of honed that interest in how can I do that in private practice. And family law was a way not only to help children and find what's best for them in this new kind of blended family situation, or this new kind of relationship between their parents, two different households, how to advocate for them, but also for the family as a whole, and
Yeah.
how to kind of help them move forward in this new lifestyle. So that's how I became interested in family law. And then upon graduating law school at Stetson Law down here in Florida,
Yeah.
I was able to find an associate position in private practice and family law down here. So that's kind of the origins of my family law career.
Wow, that is a powerful backdrop to practicing law. And it's funny, I mean, this podcast, as you know, is called Practicing with Purpose. And I think that's such a beautiful purpose-driven reason to get into the law. And I was wondering, can you tell, I know with family law, one of the reasons, to be quite honest, that I shied away, like it is such an emotional investment. How do you find that balance to be able to stay on purpose and keep that passion when I suspect the stakes sometimes are pretty high and pretty profound?
I think I'm able to keep some separation by underscoring to myself that feeding into the emotionality that a client may be feeling is not helping them most oftentimes, right? Clients may feel emotional, but what they're looking for most oftentimes is not for someone to match that emotion.
Yeah.
They want somebody to kind of be the stalwart in the storm, be that even keel, and that kind of level sounding board to um, you know allow them to think through the law, think through their options, consider the path moving forward in a logical, more objective way. So I'm able to, although there are some cases that I think in every lawyer's career that tugs at your heartstrings, and that's almost impossible in dealing with people and families,
Yeah.
that your heart doesn't go out to them and you don't feel emotional. But the way that I'm able to kind of keep that separation of church and state, so to speak, of my practice and personal, is just by telling them, by getting sucked in or matching their emotion, I'm not helping them. I'm not doing them the best service I can as their lawyer. And so that tends to keep me on track.
Oh, you read my mind. That's so funny, Lexi, because as you were speaking, I was thinking you drew this interesting distinction, between what they need versus what they want. They may actually want somebody to match that emotion sometimes, but it's definitely not what they need. And I was going to ask you if you talked to them about that. So do you find that transparency in the discussion is the easiest way to handle that dynamic?
Yeah, up front to say, I hear you, because sometimes clients just need to know that you hear them.
Yes.
And that their pain is legitimate, and that, that it's normal in some scenarios to feel the things that they're feeling. But to say, I hear you, I understand your concern, or, that does suck, even just sometimes that kind of response, and say, well, let's talk about what we can do about that. And what I found is that when you brainstorm options, you can empower your client. Absolutely. Or even the other client, to make the best decisions for them. So I kind of pivot, you empathize or sympathize, and you tell them that they're being heard, and then you present them with the path forward. And I think just even knowing there is a path and knowing that there are options out there can sometimes reduce and kind of squelch the emotionality of what they initially called or started to meet with you about. They feel kind of at ease that there's a direction, going forward.
Well, and I think it's so important that you mentioned in there as well about the even for the other side, and and I'd love you to dig a little deeper on that, because do you bring that? Let's face it, we all want to be seen, heard, and understood, and sometimes the practice of law, sort of the traditional model that we've been conditioned to buy into, doesn't allow a lot of room for us making the other side feel that they've been seen, heard, and understood. So is that something that you bring intentionally to your practice, to also bring that kind of sensitivity and sympathy and empathy really to the other side? And if so, how do you do that?
You do that, at least in my practice, I try to emphasize interest-based negotiations when I'm trying to resolve a case, which is always my number one priority in any family law case, is for the parties, if it's possible, to resolve the case between themselves. So most oftentimes cases involve negotiation. And when you start from an interest-based negotiation instead of a positional-based negotiation, interest-based negotiation is just what it sounds like. You're basing your negotiation tactics on common interests. Yeah. Where could we find mutual, common ground, where, if mom is saying, I don't want dad to have as much time sharing as me. He works too much. And so 50-50 time sharing isn't going to work because he works a lot. Yeah. And dad's saying, well, I don't want to be less of a parent on paper than she is. I'm just as good of a dad as she is a mom. So those are two positions, right? But if we look and we say, well, dad, if you can't care for her and you have to work a lot, would you agree that it's best for the children to be with a parent if they can be? And, most oftentimes, or in this particular example, let's say they say, yeah, we both like that. Well, let's talk about how we get there. Like, let's not talk about like 50-50 or number of overnights. That's positional. Let's talk about how we get the best time sharing schedule to allow dad to work. But if he has to work, maybe we build in what's called a right of first refusal to allow mom to pick up any time that dad may not be able to exercise before he calls a babysitter or somebody else. Yeah. So that's an example of how an interest of the children spending the most amount of time with a parent instead of somebody else, and going away from positions of 50-50 or not 50-50, can lend to a more mutually agreeable solution, or even a settlement at all. And so that's what I try to emphasize in my practice, is really going away from positions of, I'm not going to walk away for less than this dollar amount, into, well, what's the fear there? Right? What's driving that number or concern? And if we get to it's like an onion, right? Like if we get to the underlayers of what's motivating that position, we can sometimes, and oftentimes do, find common interests. And I feel in my practice, at least, I've had more success in interest-based negotiations than I do in positional ones. So.
Yeah. I am smiling because you are so totally speaking my language right now, Lexi. I mean, one of the things I had my epiphany mid-career. I wish I'd had it earlier. My clients used to call me the Barracuda, and I'd bought into that myth that it's all about toughness
Sure.
carrying the day. And then had this epiphany about, if you look at negotiations, which you're talking about, and when we get away from that positional, my gosh, the traits that actually make for the best negotiators are the ability to build rapport and empathy and flexibility and build trust, all those traits that are more, considered softer skills, if you will. So I love that you talk about interest versus positional. It's definitely speaking my language. And I'd be interested in your views on listening, because I think part of that empathy, tying back to what we were saying about we all want to be seen, heard, and understood. What role do you find in your practice in particular does listening play, and how do you try and elevate that listening?
I think we all, myself included, especially as lawyers that love to talk, right? That's what we do for a living.
Yeah.
Is that you'd be surprised at the number of lawyers that really their listening skills could be much improved. And like I said, myself
Absolutely.
included. So it's a thing that I'm always actively trying to work on in working with my clients and in being in court. Instead of being in my notes, listening to the other side, the directives of the court, and really not only hearing what they're saying, but the subtext of what they're saying. And again, like what's the basis underneath, or what's the fear, or what's the motivating factor of why they're saying what they're saying. And so it's definitely something that I've gotten better at throughout my career, and really realized the importance of that in a daily practice. And so I think it's vital. It's fundamental too, because if you just listen, people tell you so much of what you already need to know.
Yeah.
You may not need, 7 hours more in deposition if you just listen to what, either your client had previously told you, or what they were telling you in the deposition. So it's of vital importance in my mind to being a really good lawyer. And it's something that I think doesn't come naturally to us lawyers, just as professionals. And it's something that I'm continuously working on. And I've seen my abilities as a lawyer kind of improve, with my listening skills. So I'm going to continue to work on that going forward for sure.
I think that is so good, that beautiful. And we don't listen very effectively. I think in North America generally, our listening skills are not great. And in the practice of law in particular, I think we are so conditioned to believe that the person who is talking the most and the loudest is winning, when in fact, the juice, the gold nuggets that fall from the ceiling are when we're listening. One of the things that I often teach, I call it elevate. We hear a lot about active listening, and I teach it, I call it elevated active listening, where when we reflect back what the other person has said, that you actually do it with intention, in a way where you reflect back what they're saying in a way that's even more generous than the way they presented it. So in your case, whether it would be, the opposing client, or even for their counsel, everybody's like, why would you ever do that as a lawyer? Again, I wouldn't do it in court, but what are your thoughts on using that practice when you're in those mediations or those negotiations, being able to actually reflect back what the other person is saying in a way that's even more generous than how they characterized it, to let them know that they've been heard and try and trigger that openness? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's effective with whoever you're talking to, whether it be, your, mom at the Thanksgiving dinner table. We're getting ready for Thanksgiving this week in the United States, or it's a client of yours, or the opposing party in a collaborative divorce meeting, where you literally do sit around a table across from the opposing party and their lawyer. And you talk across the table. You do at these what they're called team meetings to try to at these series of team meetings, you try to work out a settlement, and those type of active listening, but also being able to summarize in your own words, what they've said. I think there's more buy-in then by the other side, by anyone that you're talking to, right? Is that because like you noted, that they've been heard, they know that you're listening. And that's, I think, one of the most effective ways at building rapport with anyone is just being a good listener and knowing that you've understood and heard what they're saying.
Totally agree. And so glad you mentioned about Mom and Thanksgiving. It's timely. And also I just, one of the big things I'm always out there when I'm trying to reframe negotiation is telling people all of life is a negotiation. Whether you're negotiating with your kids, with your intimate partner, with family dynamics, or multi-million-dollar deals, it's all a form of negotiation. And we show up better when we get more intentional about recognizing that. And on that, for showing up better, you've mentioned fear a couple of times, which again, I just love. One of the models that I use and teach, I call it the no fear negotiating model. And like part of that prep process, when you're going into a mediation or a hearing or, any aspect of your negotiating your life, frankly, to really sit down and recognize what are the fears that I'm bringing to the table or your client bringing to the table? How does ego show up for me and or for them? Where are the attachment areas that they're likely to get stuck? And what are the triggers that are going to cause me or them to be reactive? That FEAR, fear, ego, attachment, reactivity, and then doing the same for the other side. So how important a role do you find, if at all, that those elements play? You've talked to fear a little bit, and if you want to talk about ego, attachment, and reactivity, what role do you think it plays in negotiating to get those better outcomes?
I love that model because
Thanks.
I think fear as an emotion is, at least in my line of practice, is a huge driver of people's, at least initially, their decision making, right? But also the acronym, I love that because those are all of the things that really put obstacles in not only my client's way, but because I represent my client in one of the obstacles in representing their, in going forward in their case, are triggers, are different emotions, and how to manage those things, learning how to manage those things in your client and in your case, I think can really improve your adaptability as a lawyer, and your ability to resolve out of court really difficult cases. Because if you can manage that, at least on your side of the fence, right, you have the best ability to kind of position your client and manage their expectations so that a settlement is possible. It's not always possible because you can't control what's on the other side of the fence, right? But I feel like, again, as my career has gone on, I've become more adept at seeing those triggers ahead of time instead of, on the spot, and being able to kind of manage clients' expectations and emotions better. I've seen cases resolve quicker, and cases that may not have resolved, without going to court previously, that have been able to resolve outside of court because of those things. So,
and with better outcomes. And I love that when you said, at least on our side, which is so true. When we are able at least to show up as the best version of ourselves and get our clients to a place where they're able to show up as the best version of themselves. There's so much emotion in family. You can't always get them here, but at least get them to the best version of themselves. You get those better outcomes. And I'd love on that, speaking of outcomes, how would you define success? I think, again, as lawyers, we have been so conditioned to see success and define success based on a very traditional sort of old school competitive model. And I'd be interested in your views about how you define success, and I'd love what you attribute your success to while you're at it.
Personally or professionally in practice?
Both actually, I'd love.
I think for me personally, I think getting better at managing work-life balance, is something that's it's like the unicorn, I think, in the legal practice. Like everyone's trying to find it, but the few that do are, kind of mystical beings, right? And so maybe it'll never happen where I feel like now I've got it, now I really have nailed it. But that is success to me in getting better at how do I manage, balance things in my personal life. I'm a new mom to a 10-month-old little boy. And so how do I manage that in a pandemic, while running a solo practice, and being able to kind of draw boundaries. Whereas, previously when I was a single, lady with no kids, I could work at all hours, but saying, work is important. My clients mean, a lot to me, but so does my son. And so to me, being able to constantly working on that and being able to, the best I can, find that balance for me is success personally. On the professional side, I think having, I'm not a large volume practice. I consider myself more of a boutique practice. And I do that because my clients to me aren't just a number. So I really want to make sure that they get the best possible outcome for them, and that I have the ability to talk them through things like, their expectations, things like their triggers, things like their, emotionality in the case, and what their interests are, what their goals are, and treating them as, on a one-on-one basis. So taking a select group of clients that are similarly minded, and being able to get good outcomes, and good is relative, but good for them, whatever that means, and helping them and their families move on in a way that they're proud of, helping clients move from one stage of their life to another in a way that they can hold their head up high and be proud of is success to me.
Oh, that was such a great answer. And I particularly love that at the outset, when I asked the question, your first response was to draw that clarity. Are you speaking personally or professionally? Because thinking about that with intention is the first hurdle, right? I mean, I think so many lawyers, as soon as we hear the word success, we immediately talk about our professional life or think about our professional life, and don't spend enough time thinking about what does success look like for me in my personal life. And I hear you. We started late and made up for lost time. I had 3 kids in 3 years, and juggling. Wow. Oh my gosh.
Super mama.
Well, and don't we feel sometimes how we have to be the super mom and the super career woman, and I love your unicorn reference. I think that was so great. And the other nugget, I just want to really put a pin in for our listeners and our viewers out there as well. It sounds like you have real intentionality about choosing the clients you want to serve. You're not about volume. You are very specific about who you want to serve, who you can give the best value to, and also who fills your boots. Is that accurate?
Sure.
Love it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that if you're looking, there's a lid for every pot, right? And so, but like I said, I'm a new mom, and I'm really personally trying to have a good balance on the best I can. Yeah. I've become more selective about the type of clients that I would like to work with, because, depending on the client that you makes up your practice, that can really change the dynamic of how you practice. And I'd rather be in the driver's seat and saying, this is the type of client that I'd like to serve, instead of being on the receiving end and kind of, looking up from a stack of papers and being like, how did I get here? Or not really loving coming to work every day, which I do now. Yeah. And I think that there's, like I said, a lid for every pot. And there's, if that's your style of practice, then there's somebody out there to serve you. Yeah. But like you kind of summarized so eloquently, I'm really trying to be more selective about the type of client so that I can give them the best version of myself as a lawyer, and matching that practice style with the type of client, I think is a huge. It's like any kind of relationship, right? Where there's good fits and there's not great fits. And so trying to find, clients a small set of clients that are the best fit for me is my focus right now.
Such gold there. Such gold there, Lexi. I think we often, without realizing it, come from that scarcity mindset. I need more clients, more clients. I need to have
Yeah.
enough clients. And being able to come from that abundance mindset that I want the right clients, because you spoke beautifully about that, how it affects how you show up and practice as a lawyer. And I found it also impacts on your staff. It affects the whole morale of your office. If you've got the wrong kind of clients, those clients that, are just really demanding or aren't in alignment with your values, it can really suck the morale out of an office. Has that been
Yeah.
your experience as well?
Yeah. I think every attorney, Cindy, you probably have one that you can think of that you're like, you know, I knew like the flags were there, the red flags were there, and I knew I shouldn't have taken that case because
Yep.
it wasn't a great fit or for whatever reason. And then, it ends up being that wasn't, you should have listened to your gut,
Yeah.
right?
Trusting that
And so,
intuition.
right, sure. And I think everybody makes that mistake, whether somewhere along their career, mostly early on, but whatever. And so what I've tried to get better at as well is just listening to that gut, right? So if I don't feel like, the client during the initial consultation is a great fit for me, then I don't try to make it fit. And I don't know if you've had success with that, Cindy, where
Yeah.
you've gotten better at finding the clients that are the best fit for you.
Yeah, and you're right. It comes usually on the hard road of experience from having really,
Yeah.
really horrific experience, and you recognize. And I think it's being aware of the cost that comes with it, right? Because sometimes we just put our head down and plow through it. So really being able to take a step back and contemplating the cost of it can be so valuable. Now, you
Mhm.
obviously bring such passion, Lexi, to the practice, and I'm wondering if you can share sort of with our listeners, how have you maintained that passion for the practice? What tips do you have for people? I mean, some you've already alluded to, finding that balance, choosing your clients, beautiful sort of gold nuggets there. Anything else you would suggest that helps you be able to show up and maintain that passion every day?
It sounds a little corny, but it helps me when on the bad days or even at the end of the year, like it's getting close to now,
Yeah.
maintain some perspective about the good days
Yeah.
is I keep a little folder of, every time a client sends like a thank you note or I even printed out pictures of like the most beautiful flower arrangement that a
Oh,
client sent me after their divorce. I mean, it was stunning. And I keep it and every year has a different folder, right? And at the end of the year, when I'm having a tough day and I'm like, I just don't feel like I did the
yeah.
best job I could today, I pull that out and I start looking through it. Um, and it really changes your perspective and it gives you're like, okay, now I know, or now I'm reminded why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm doing this day in and day out. And today's just a bad day or, bad week, whatever it is. And it renews your passion for why you're doing this to begin with and who you're helping. And so that's my little nerdy kind of tip for any of those lawyers or that are listening or practicing is that even if you keep it in your email, you don't even have to print it out.
Yeah.
I'd highly recommend it because it brings a smile to your face on days when maybe that's not on the schedule.
You know
So
what? I don't think that is nerdy or corny at all. I think that is such a gorgeous suggestion, and I can't believe I haven't thought of it. With a lot of clients when I'm coaching, I have them do what I call the brag list, putting together all of the things that you can be proud of, all of your accomplishments, because we can be so hard on ourselves. But I think this is a fabulous idea. All of those kudos and compliments to be able to remind ourselves about why we love doing that. I think that is such a perfect answer to that question about how to keep that passion because it reminds us about the
sure.
impact we have when we show up with that passion. I think that's just gorgeous. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Let me ask, what do you know now? Speaking of corny, I know it's kind of a corny question, but I actually find there's some real value in this.
Yeah.
What do you know now that you wish you knew when you first started that could have helped you?
Probably not to fight what you're feeling. It kind of goes to the trust your gut kind of sentiment, but it's a little different. Like if you're trying something in your practice, like if you're working in a firm or you're out on your own or you're in-house, just in terms of legal practice. But it could be anything in life. If you're in a relationship, that you're trying to make work, and you're really taking ownership and responsibility of your position, wherever that is, and you've done all you can, don't be afraid to go in another direction. Don't try to force it to fit
Yeah.
for many, many years to come, because there are other options out there, whether it be, in your personal life, whether it be professionally. And I think that had I known that at the time that I started practicing law, I think that would have been helpful to me. But, you are trained to think like, I have to pay my dues, and I gotta, I have all these student loans, like I need to make this work. But really just listen to yourself, like kind of get still, and if it doesn't feel right after you've done all the things that to do, then maybe try something else, whether that be a different practice area or any, that there's so many options in life that are out there. And it doesn't matter if you've been doing it 2 days or 20 years, there's still other things out there for you. It's not too late.
Yeah, that is such a great insight. But and as you were speaking, I'm just thinking about all of the possible applications of that, because both personally and professionally, we sometimes try and fit that square peg into that round hole,
Yes,
and we keep
yes,
working it and working it. And I think part of that is that idea in the law in particular. So for our listeners and our viewers out there, I think there's some deep conditioning that it's supposed to be hard, and
yes,
and it
yes.
doesn't have to be hard. Like, where did that come from? I love that I think that's a great note for us as we're winding up. I can't believe how quick this time has gone. But this mindset shift that somehow this is supposed to be hard and it ought to be hard. And if we keep our nose to the grindstone, that's the way it's supposed to be. And we kind of pat ourselves on the back about that, as opposed
Sure.
to choosing the path of least resistance and that actually ties back beautifully to the question about passion. I think, Lexi, that's another great tip you've given us about how to maintain our passion for the practice of law as well. Beautiful.
Yeah, is finding the path that works best for you, that may not be, like you mentioned, the hardest and road to hoe,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that road is the best for everyone, and you could be happier on a different road. And so finding whatever that is, I think really would help, a lot of lawyers out there.
Yeah.
Don't try to fit the square peg in the round hole.
Yeah.
Just try to fit something that may work better.
Yeah. And I think that applies beautifully both at the macro level and the micro level, right? Right from like, don't feel like you need to pursue the traditional litigation practice, for example. Maybe it's in-house, maybe it's doing corporate work, maybe it's using your law degree and finding a way to practice in a really unique boutique, very specialized kind of area. Create a new area, for heaven's sakes, right? Find new creative ways, and how you show up every day and choosing your cases and choosing your clients as well, taking that path of least resistance. Don't be the salmon fighting upstream.
Right.
Like, I think that's great advice. Now, on a personal shifting to the personal, I always close out by asking people, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And again, well, doesn't have to be it can be personally or professionally. I mean, that was a great epiphany you gave us there about something you wish you knew. But what would you say is one of the greatest mindset shifts you've had that's helped you in life?
I think realizing that there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Mm,
And, people say that, right? That's an old saying that people come to know. But I'm not sure how many, at least I didn't really put that into practice. Again, knowing that there's other options out there, and that, you don't have to, run a case one way.
yeah.
There's a million different iterations of how, one case can go, and how you can practice law, how, and that's kind of a mindset shift that I was really kind of more linear in terms of my thinking about how to practice law. And there are really so many different ways in which you can do it.
Oh,
And even within your own practice, different ways that you can go about the same case. and what may be good for one client is not good for the next. And feeling comfortable with that, kind of trusting yourself, trusting
Yeah.
myself enough to kind of give myself that freedom to make that call as we go, or on case by case basis. That's really helped me in being more dynamic as a lawyer, is knowing that it doesn't have to be a cookie cutter thing. And that's why I love the boutique practice style, is because I can do that. I have the freedom to do
Yeah.
that. I don't have to meet certain markers or certain billables or certain, I don't have to follow like a case plan where, I click the button and the next step pops up.
Yeah.
I can really drive that bus and let my client, most importantly, decide which options are best for them.
Yeah. And I think that mindset shift actually ties in so beautifully with so much of what we've talked about here today as well, because I think it helps you to stay on purpose. It helps you to make sure that you're not trying to squeeze that round peg into the square hole or vice versa. And I think it really, at its core, allows you to show up as the best version of yourself, because you don't feel like you have to pursue one way. You're able to keep moving and sliding. And if you're hitting that resistance, that sort of competitive soul sucking fight mode that often comes with the practice, you're able to take a pause, take a breath, step back, and think there's more than one way to skin a cat. And what's another way I can approach this that's going to get those sort of softer, better outcomes? So I love that. I love that. So any final thoughts you'd want to share with us? This has been fantastic. Lexi, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great to have you. We'll have to make sure to get you back. Any last minute?
I just want to thank you for having me on. I so enjoyed having this discussion. I love the practice of law, and I love talking about how I can, and we as lawyers can do that better. And I just love the message of what you're trying to get out there, that how do we do that better, and with purpose. So thank you so much. It's been an honor of mine to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. And likewise, and you have certainly elevated for many people out there how they can practice with purpose and be able to find a better way to practice law. So thank you for that. And for our listeners out there, and I'll be sure to put this in the show notes as well, if you want to learn more about Lexi, you can check her out on Facebook or Instagram at Larkin Law. So that's Larkin Law, and also on LinkedIn as well at Larkin Law. So be sure to check her out. We'll put that in the show notes as well, so you can find out the great things that Lexi is up to. And certainly if you're in her area, you can check her out if you happen to have a family issue that you need to deal with. So I am sure you have all got loads of value from this episode. I certainly have. And if you haven't already subscribed, please make sure to do that and share it with anyone that you think could get value from this message. If you know any lawyers out there who could benefit from finding a better way to practice and maybe rekindling their passion for the practice of law, make sure to pass on this link and have them check out our Practicing with Purpose for Lawyers Only podcast. And also make sure to check out my Art of Feminine Negotiation podcast as well. We have all kinds of tips about how to be able to negotiate your best life on your terms. And that's a wrap for this episode. So until next time, find ways that you can practice on purpose and find a better way to practice law so you can rekindle your passion and make a difference in the world. Because let's face it, that's why most of us start the practice of law, and you can negotiate your best life on your terms. Thanks.